Amen. Thank you, Tom. Filled with the fullness. I'm glad I went just earlier, but I still want to be filled with the fullness. Still, I've gone old school. Oh, you can't see. Look at this. I've got a sermon in plastic folders. But forget that. Why don't we have the Lion of Judah just roaring over us, yeah? Can't we just have that? Argh. I just think, whenever I think of the Lion of Judah, I think of the Lion King. I know that's Disney and it's not in the Bible, but bear with me. But it's when he's gone off with his mates. What's his name? Is it Simba? What's the name? Simba, right? He's gone a bit wayward, prodigal son stuff. And then his father comes, and I hope I get this right. And his father towers over him and says to his son, "You are more than you have become." And he was calling, as Vanessa was saying a few weeks ago, he was calling out the gold in this young person's life. There is more than you've become because you've just been playing games. And so far, I take that as a word. I'm going to redeem Disney and speak it over us as a word. That the Lion of Judah who roars over us, and at his roar, the enemies flee. 1 John 3:8, he defeats the works of the enemy, if you want some scripture in there. And he roars. And he speaks over you, wherever you are this morning or listening to this. You are more than you have yet become. He's calling forth his precious presence and DNA out of your soul, spirit unto spirit, to manifest in your life. Even in lockdown, which is really what the theme is this morning, even in lockdown, God is at work. Amazing work. Now, lockdown 3 is tiring. It's wearing. It's exhausting. I know that when it was announced, it was shortly after Christmas. Christmas had been reduced to one day, and now the announcement was made that we're going into another lockdown. I know that was hard on people. That was hard on people. Some of us have gone back into furlough. Some of us have concerns about jobs. Some of us frontline workers, key workers, we're stressed, we're strained. It's been tough, and it still is tough. I'm hoping for some good news tomorrow. I take the figures seriously. I take the whole thing seriously. I don't want us to be silly, but I know we're missing that social connection. And so when I was thinking about the third lockdown, I was drawn to the story of the exile. Not the reasons for going into exile in the Old Testament, because that was about breaking covenant and situations that have been building up for decades, but just the frustration of being in Babylon, and especially not being able to go to Jerusalem, not being able to worship in the way that they were used to worship. And of course, their theology was still that God lived there. And so they were away from the very presence of God. And we just started meeting at Burnham again. We just had a very small congregation, and we lost that opportunity. Obviously, for COVID, we have done sermons about our response to COVID. Just to remind you, I just love it. It's the very last paragraph in Acts chapter 11, where some prophets had come up to Antioch. And one of them, Agabus, had this prophetic word and was saying, there's going to be a famine in the land. And this wasn't just like there was a famine in the land. This was a prophetic word from God. He brought this to the attention of the early church. And so what was their response? And it wasn't, oh my goodness, God's judging us. Oh my goodness, our moral standards have dropped. We've been mixing our fibers and eating seafood. But it wasn't that. It was simply the fact that then let us be a help. Let us go and help people in Jerusalem. And they took up a collection and they supported people. And I'm so grateful through 2020, 2021. We've got the food bank still running. I'd do a shout out, but the people who run the food bank, I know they don't want their name shouted through the internet. But you know who you are, and bless you guys. And loads of us, we've been playing taxi driver. We've taken people to the hospital. We've taken people for their vaccinations. We've done doorstep deliveries. We've made ourselves available, as long as it wasn't too much of a risk to our own selves practically. We've been there and we've helped. But it's still lockdown 3. It's still frustrating. And we're in exile. We can't come to the house that God has provided for us. Cornerstone, woo, really has provided for us. And burn home as a family with 200 plus people meeting together. But as I read around the subject, I discovered that actually this period of time was one of the most significant, positively significant periods of time in the life of the nation. Many historians, Jewish historians, secular historians, agree this was the making and shaping of a nation. They came back stronger. So let's pray for that. Let's hope for that. But first, okay, a quick history lesson, very basic, but a very quick history lesson. So Sarah, if you could run the VT. So some of you have seen this before. I apologize if it's a repeat. This is the history of the Old Testament very, very basically. If you're a scholar, please do not pull out your hair. 2000 BC, Abraham. 1500 BC, Moses. Roughly 1000, David. The second temple built in 500. And then Jesus at the turn of the millennium. And we're looking at the exile, which is the period at the end of the first lot of Kings at the end and Chronicles. So Saul, David, Solomon, and then the kingdom divides sadly, less than 100 years, and it divides into 2. Let's have a map as well as a timeline. Let's really push the boat out. There we go. There's Israel. The Mediterranean is on your left, beautiful blue water. The Sea of Galilee in the north, the Dead Sea in the south, and there's Israel, the 12 tribes, divided by Rehoboam and Jeroboam, 10 in the north, 2 in the south. So we'll go back to our timeline. That lasted for about 200 years or so. Then the Assyrians, who were the superpower at the time, came and they took over the northern kingdom, Israel. About 130 years later or so, the Babylonians are now the superpower, and they come and they take over Judah and destroy Jerusalem, and in particular the temple. And this is what we call the beginning of the exile. People came back at different times, but we normally think of it in terms of 70 years because that's the years between the fall of the temple and it being reconstructed roughly in the year 516. There you are. I hope you made notes. There'll be a test at the end. Okay, so that's the history lesson. I now want to do some reading. So if you've got a Bible with you, I'm going to be reading from Lamentations. That's a poem at the end of the book of Jeremiah. It's between Jeremiah and Ezekiel, okay? Lamentations chapter 1. I'm just going to do the first 4 verses of something of the pain and the frustration of losing the land and going into exile. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all of her lovers, there is no one to comfort her. They have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. Verse 4, the roads to Zion mourn, but no one comes to her appointed festivals. All her gateways are desolate. Her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. It's a heavy poem if you continue to read. It is the reflection and the sorrow of the loss of the nation, the loss of the city, the loss of livelihoods, homes, and the temple. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. I remember the pictures from London in the first lockdown. Piccadilly Circus, almost empty, just a few buses in the streets. Or where I walk here in York, I often walk down East Parade. I don't anymore, it's too many people. But in lockdown 1, Dora Marie and I, we could walk down the middle of the road. and not worry. Lockdown 1, you used to wake up in the morning and hear the birds sing. Beautiful. She has become a widow, once great among the nations. I talked about in the history lesson, the Assyrians were the superpower, and then the Babylonians were the superpower. Well, in the times of David, and particularly Solomon, they were the superpower. They were the great nation. They had defeated their enemies. The Queen of Sheba, as Jesus recalls, traveled hundreds of miles just to see the spectacular temple and palace, and Solomon in his wealth and in his wisdom. And that's gone. That's gone. Among her lovers, there's no one to comfort her. The word lovers there references the concept of illicit affairs. They were married to Yahweh through covenant arrangements, but then they bought into agreements with other nations, buying into their deities. The father of Hezekiah, Ahaz, it said he would have sacrificed at least one of his children to the god Molech. A child sacrifice just for a peace agreement with another nation. How they had fallen. And the one that really pulls on my heart is verse 4. The roads to Zion mourn. As people look back towards Judah from Babylon, as they look back towards the road they've been on, it's people grieving the loss of the city, but more, the loss of the centrality of worship. When we use the word Zion in the Bible, yes, we're talking about the location of Jerusalem, but we're actually talking specifically about the spiritual qualities. Let's go up to Zion. Let's go up and worship. They're by the rivers of Babylon, where they're sitting down, remembering and grieving the loss of that place. I miss increase. It's the one thing we can't replicate is corporate praise. I think the bands do a brilliant job. I'm not on the rota. I haven't got the guts for that. Yeah, that's a tough gig. And tonight we're going to try our best in the living room to really push in and have a place of praise and intercession, because that's on God's heart. But they must have mourned the loss of the temple. And so I'm halfway through the sermon, and let's have the title. The title slide actually says, Exiled, the Brokenness. Now, it's obvious to see the brokenness in Lamentations. It's obviously to understand the brokenness of these people who've lost the city. But the brokenness in the eyes of God happened decades, if not centuries before. If you read through 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, if you read through, it's be Kings, not Chronicles, that's only the Judah story. But if you read through the King's letters, books, you hear God revert back to the sin of Jeroboam. If you remember my little map, I had Jeroboam there. Yes, should have paid attention. Yeah, it always goes back to the sins of way back, centuries before. I was in Argentina at the turn of the century. Argentina had an amazing revival in the mid-'80s, and people say it was linked to the brokenness that came after the Falklands mess and crisis and issue. But when you go and visit these pastors of amazing churches and visit the people in Argentina, they say, oh, Simon, the brokenness came well before that. Watch Evita. Hey, don't cry for me, Ma, Argentina. But you know, watch. You know, extreme politics brings brokenness. The missing years of the 70s, where people would literally just go missing. Jesus in Matthew 7 talks about a house that falls down with a mighty crash. And though you might think that was because of a storm, the issue was there long before the weather changed. The issue was there the moment the builder decided to build on sand. That was the brokenness of ignoring all the laws of architecture and engineering for a beach house. But as I said, this period historically was one of the best periods for the nation. And they came back stronger. Something happened while they were in exile and were away. And they came back stronger, which reminds me of a phrase we're using today, or at least the government is, build back better. That's what we're going to be having to do when we come out of lockdown eventually. We're going to be building back better. And my heart goes out for us in lockdown 3 and just the frustrations and the tiredness and the exhaustion and the anxiety and the uncertainties and the unknowns. What sort of state will we be in when we come back? And will we be able to come back stronger like they did in the exile? This is when this nation was formed. This is when we start using the term Jew or people being Jewish, the culture, because this isn't the Israelites. This is the people of Judah. And so now we're using the word Jew and Jewish. This is where they got their language for centuries to come. This is where they would have learned Aramaic, and they were still speaking Aramaic when Jesus was born 500 years later. This is when they finalized the language of the written language of Hebrew, and the Hebrew script became specific and unique to them within the region. And this is when most of the Old Testament history was actually written. It was a time of reflection, and in the coming weeks, this is what we'll hear about how they got through this. And still there was a prophetic voice. Still there was the voice of God saying, look, I know it looks like a pile of bones, but I see a mighty army. I know it looks like just a small stream, paddling pool, but it's a river that's going to go wider and stronger the further it goes. You are going to influence nation after nation after nation. And there I start to see the image of the church in Acts chapter 1, starting in Jerusalem and going to Judea and then Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And Paul's heart in the end of Romans when he says, I want to get to Spain. Bless him, he didn't make it. He got to Rome. But his heart was to get to Spain with this amazing message of hope and truth and salvation. It's not too late, folks. Maybe lockdown, maybe 2020, 2021 has revealed whether we built on rock or we built on sand. Maybe we're struggling because we're out of fellowship with each other and we haven't really learned how to fellowship with God, how to find those places of praise. But it's not too late because the people of Judah came back stronger. That's my prayer, that we will come back stronger. We've got a Lent course. What a great period. We're working now towards Easter, new beginnings, new life, new hope. Spring is in the air. Hopefully, I'm prophesying that. Spring is in the air. We're going to come back stronger. Tie into what Pat's doing on Sunday nights. That's starting not this Sunday night, but the next Sunday night. We've got our own Lent verses on the various social media platforms. Do you know what I do? I take a screenshot with my phone and then put it into my photograph, so I'll have to start cancelling them soon. So when I'm out walking around, I just have to open my photo album, and the first photo I see is the verse of the day and the instructions linked to it. And just trying to feed on God's word wherever I can and find those opportunities. It's your choice, rock or sand. It's our choice. But maybe in these moments of lockdown, we have opportunities to choose to do things differently. And maybe some of us, because of poor discipline, I'm never the best at discipline, maybe some of us need to deliberately buy into something, connect with something, make those decisions. The book of Deuteronomy is said to be the book that was found in the temple at the Reformation of Josiah. Josiah, the boy king, who then did the spiritual reform of the nation. And they found the book of Deuteronomy because as they read it, that seemed to be the words they were finding and what was stirring in their hearts. And Deuteronomy became in this way the classic book of the Pentateuch. And as they came out of exile, it would have been probably the book that Ezra is reading to them as they start to settle back into the land. And in it are some classic lines of remembrance. And as we move towards a ministry time now, and I'll just take this slowly to make sure we get everything in the right order. But what I want to do is I want to read some famous words from Deuteronomy, and eventually, not yet, Sarah, thank you, not yet, but we will put them on the screen for you. And then really what I want you to do is to respond to those words. If you're in a family, why don't you share a favorite Bible verse together or something that you're very grateful for? and just speak it out to one another. Maybe you want to just bless the house you're in and thank God for a roof over your head. If you're on your own, just be quiet with God. Just spend that time. That's the verse today. Pat Willis put a cracking verse on the Lent course today. And it just says to be waiting in God, being in his presence. You don't have to fill the space with words. If you're on your own, just center yourself on God. Be grateful and hear his voice speaking to you. So again, no excuse. It doesn't make great TV, but we're trying to do church here, and we're trying to worship together. So Sarah, could you put those verses on the screen? And for some of you, you'll look at these verses. It's a very famous prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord. Yeah. I'll try with the Hebrew. My Hebrew's not up to scratch, but we'll have a go. Because it's a famous prayer. Most Jews would know this by heart. So should I. Hear, O Israel. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohimnu, Adonai Echad, Yehavta'eh Adonai Elohecha, Bechol Levacha, Uchol Nefshacha, Uchol Meodecha. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words, which I'm commanding you today, shall be in your heart. And you shall repeat them diligently to your children and speak of them when you sit at your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you get up. You shall also tie them as signs on your hand and on your forelets of your forehead, or literally between your eyes. You shall also write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And though some Orthodox Jews take that literally, it's probably just a metaphor. It's just to say, talk about the Lord. Let his name be on your lips. Talk in your home. Talk whatever you're doing with your hands and your arms. Work. Think of the Lord in that task. Whatever your thought is, right at the front of your mind, let the Lord be in that thought. Bless your house as you go into it, and as you leave it, just say thank you. Thank you for a roof over my head. Thank you for paying the rent this month. Let's remember the Lord. Let's remember him with all our heart and all our soul and all our strength. Let's have 2 or 3 minutes. Just speak out your gratitude to one another. And if you're on your own, just draw on these wonderful words and have time with God. I know it's a little thing, and it's almost an embarrassing thing, but I changed my car about 2 years ago. It's the first time I got like a sophisticated car with a bit of a computer in it and clever things. And sometimes when I'm driving with Dora Maria, I still say to Dora Maria, I said, I'm still so grateful that God gave us a beautiful car. It's good to have gratitude in our hearts. It's good to remember the goodness of the Lord. I think I was sharing with the team the other day at a staff meeting. I said, I thanked God for something the other day, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't him, but it just was what happened. But I still wanted to say, God, I'm just acknowledging this moment of thanksgiving, and I want to put you in the picture. Because in a sense, all good things come from our Father of lights. I'm sorry about the lockdown. I'm sorry we can't be together. But let's make the most of this time. Let's use this time. Let's redeem some of this time to build our lives on the rock. Let Jesus be the center. And so this is going to be our closing song, which really is a prayer. So just sing along or mumble along. And so I'm mumbling along. That's the folks in this room are not allowed to sing out loud. But it's a prayer. Let him be the center. Let him be the source. Let him be the light. Let him be the hope. Let him be the song. You know, I did that just to show Stephen that you can remember what order those things come in. Jesus be the center. Amen.